Welcome to Terran Apex Protocol, where the galaxy keeps underestimating humanity and keeps regretting it. If these stories are your kind of story, subscribe and stay with us. My name's Atlas. Today, the galaxy's oldest nightmare takes a human host in record time, and then discovers what a million years of fever taught us. Let's begin. The cargo manifest said machine parts, and the manifest lied. Dr. Veska knew it the moment the pod cracked, because machine parts do not hiss. She was 2 decks up when the bay alarm sounded, and by the time she reached the observation gallery, the air below was already wrong. A fine gray shimmer, drifting up from the split casing like heat off a road. Her bloodlight, the luminous current that ran visible beneath every Ilvathi's translucent skin, dimmed to almost nothing, the old reflex of a species that had once survived by going dark. "Seal the bay," she said into the comm, and her voice came out steady, which surprised her. "Seal it now. That's mirror spore. Nobody breathes, nobody touches. Seal the bay." Every species in the galaxy knew the arithmetic of the mirror, the way every species knew the temperature at which their own blood boiled. 3 minutes. That was the whole catechism. A mirror spore found a host, and for 3 minutes nothing happened at all. And then the host straightened up, smiled with someone else's mouth, and walked calmly to the nearest airlock, the nearest spaceport, the nearest crowd. In the first bloom, 100 worlds had gone from inhabited to harvested inside a standard year, not conquered. Conquered implies a war. The mirror had simply spread, the way frost spreads on glass, and the galaxy had survived it the way you survive frost, by burning everything it touched. There was no cure. There had never been a cure. There was fire, and there was distance, and there was the Tesser Combine's cleanse protocol, which was both. All of which is to say that when Dr. Veska looked down into the cargo bay of the freighter Caravel and saw the gray shimmer settling over 2 of her crewmates, she was not looking at a medical emergency. She was looking at a funeral that hadn't started yet. Tilo was closest to the pod. The young Quill deckhand stood frozen with a cargo scanner, still in his small clawed hands, quills flat with terror, directly under the falling spore. And Sam Reyes, the cook, who had no reason to be in the bay at all, except that he was carrying a crate of root vegetables to cold storage, who was 40 and unhurried, and the least essential crew member on the entire manifest, looked up at the shimmer, looked at Tilo, and did the human thing. He put down the crate, crossed the bay in 4 steps, and wrapped himself around the deckhand like a coat. The shimmer settled on his back, his neck, his hair. Tilo, pressed under him against the deck plating, did not get so much as a flake of it. The bay doors sealed. The countdown started in every head on the ship at the same moment, silent and absolute. 3 minutes. Veska stood at the gallery glass and watched the cook help Tilo up, brush him off, and check him over with the brisk, certain hands of a man who had checked people over before. He looked up at the gallery once. He knew the arithmetic, too. Everyone did. He gave her a small nod, the kind you give a colleague when a shift goes wrong. And then he walked himself to the quarantine alcove at the bay's far end, stepped inside, and closed the inner door before anyone had to ask. He sat down on the bench. He rolled up his sleeves. He waited to stop being himself. 1 minute. The bay was silent except for Tilo's thin keening and the tick of the pod's ruined casing. Veska's hand found the emergency console, the one with the babe's atmosphere controls, and rested there, because protocol said that at the first sign of the smile, the bay went to vacuum, and the doctor's hand was supposed to be the one that did it. 2 minutes. Sam Reyes sat on the bench with his forearms on his knees, breathing slow, watching the door, exactly the way he stood at his stove on the long hauls, patient with something that could not be hurried. 3 minutes. Nothing happened. 3 minutes and 30 seconds. 4. Veska realized her bloodlight had stopped entirely, that she was gripping the console like a perch in a storm, that the entire bridge was on the open channel listening to nothing happen. At 6 minutes, Sam Reyes looked up at the gallery glass with an expression of mild apology and said, "I don't want to alarm anybody, but I think I'm getting a fever." At 10 minutes, he was shivering. At 20, he was flushed and sweating through his shirt, and asked, with genuine embarrassment, whether anyone could bring him water, and maybe a blanket, if it wasn't too much trouble, seeing as he couldn't exactly come get them himself. At the 1-hour mark, Dr. Veska sat down at her terminal, opened a new case file, and stared at it for a long moment, because in the entire shared medical literature of the galaxy, 11 centuries of it, there was no template for what she had to type next. "Mirror exposure, confirmed," she wrote. "Host conscious. Host apologizing. Host requesting soup." While the cook ran his fever, the captain ran the manifest, because somebody had shipped a live mirror seed pod onto his boat labeled as machine parts, and Brel intended to die knowing who. The pod's routing history was a smuggler's laundry list, 4 transfers, 3 shell consignors, a custom seal from a station that had conveniently burned down. But cargo lies less well than paperwork. The pod's inner casing was lab-grade cryostat, the kind used to keep biological samples viable, and the spore mass inside had been packed in growth medium. Veska confirmed it from the residue with her stomach turning slow circles. The spores were not wild contamination, not some derelict's drifting ghost scooped up by accident. They had been cultivated. Somewhere out past the Combine's patrol lines, someone was farming the galaxy's extinction event in trays, and selling it to buyers who could only want it for one thing. Brel filed the evidence under Combine seal, for the tribunal there would have to be, and stood looking at the routing list a long time. The manifest had lied about the machine parts, he said. It had not lied about where they were grown. Somebody grew these, on purpose, and the only reason their weapon is sweating through blankets in my cargo bay, instead of wearing my crew like coveralls, is that it hit the one species nobody ever bothers to weaponize things against. He sent the file, and with it the first hour of Veska's scans, and he addressed it not just to Quarantine Command, but to every registry doctor on the open medical band, because Brel was old enough to know that data this strange gets buried by careful people, and the only vaccine against careful people is witnesses. The scans came back at hour 3, and Veska ran the assay twice more before she let herself believe the numbers, because the first rule of medicine on a mixed-species ship is that impossible results mean contaminated samples. The samples were clean. The results stayed impossible. The mirror was in him. That part was textbook. The spore load had germinated on schedule, threads of it spreading through the bloodstream toward the spine, toward the brainstem, toward the soft gray country where the mirror did its governing. In any other species, the threads would have arrived in 90 seconds and started issuing orders. In Sam Reyes, they were arriving and dying. The scan showed it in real time, in colors Veska had calibrated herself and still didn't trust. The threads advanced. Something met them. The threads stopped existing. She put the imagery on the wall of the med bay and stood looking at it the way you look at a foreign battlefield report. "What is that?" Captain Brel asked from the doorway. The Caravel's captain filled most of it, gray-bristled and old enough to have seen Cleanse Protocol carried out twice, which was why his question came out quiet. "What's killing the threads?" "He is," Veska said. "His blood. It's full of soldiers." She had read the human medical files at certification, the way every licensed physician had to, 4 hours of mandatory xenobiology that most doctors skimmed and forgot. And she was discovering, with the specific vertigo of a professional who has skimmed something important, that the files had not been exaggerating. The human body did not have a defense system. It had a war. A permanent, grinding, million-year war fought every hour of every life against everything the death world had thrown at it, and the death world had thrown everything. Cells whose entire function was to recognize strangers and eat them. Cells that manufactured bespoke weapons against enemies they had never met, on spec, in advance. A fever response that cooked the battlefield on the theory that the body could tolerate the burning longer than the invader could, a theory the body was willing to test to the edge of its own death. The files used the phrase scorched earth. The files used the phrase acceptable collateral. The files, Vesca had once assumed, were translated badly. They were not. Every species in the catalog had evolved on worlds gentle enough that avoidance worked. Seal the wound, shed the limb, go dark, flee. The Ilvathi dimmed. The quill dropped quills. The mirror had never needed to fight for a host in its entire evolutionary history, because no host had ever fought back. It walked into nervous systems through doors no one had ever bothered to lock. It had walked into Sam Reyes, and found, behind the door, a standing army with a grudge. Hour 9. The fever crested at a temperature that would have denatured Ilvathi blood, and Sam, propped on the quarantine cot in a nest of blankets, asked Vesca through the glass what the score was. "The score," she repeated. "Him versus me," Sam said. His face was hollowed and shining, and he still managed the tone of a man asking about a ball game. "Doc, I've had food poisoning worse than this. I once cooked through a double shift in Veracruz with dengue. Just tell me if I'm winning. You are running a core temperature that is medically impossible," Vesca said. "Your white count looks like a mobilization order. There are pieces of dead mirror in your lymphatic system the size of rice grains, because your body is folding them up and storing them for later study." She looked at her own readout, and her bloodlight did the thing it had been doing all day, flickering between dread and something that was not dread at all. "You're winning," she said. "Good," Sam said, and settled back into the blankets. "Wake me if it tries anything fancy. And Doc, somebody make sure Tilo eats. He forgets when he's scared." That was the other data point Vesca could not fit in a file. Hour after hour, the cook's questions ran outward. Whether Tilo was eating. Whether the Bay crew who'd been near the pod were cleared. Whether anyone had remembered to take the bread starter out of proofing, because it would sour by morning, and the next world with decent flour was 19 days out. The thing in his blood was fighting for its life against an enemy older than its species, and the man around the blood was managing a kitchen through a window. The absolution arrived at hour 11. It came out of jump close and hot, a Tessar combined corvette with its burn projectors already deployed, and its commandant did not request a channel so much as occupy one. The face that filled the caravel's bridge screen was Drassic, plated and graven, with the rank sigils of quarantine command and eyes that had been doing this work for a long time. "This is Commandant Orvek, aboard the Absolution. Your distress flag shows Mur exposure, one host, contained." "Confirm." "Confirmed," Brell said. "Contained and," he hesitated, and Vesca watched him decide against the word stable, ongoing. "There is no ongoing," Orvek said. "There is exposed, and there is cleansed. You have my sympathy for your crewmen, Captain, sincerely. I have written more of these letters than any officer in the Combine. Cleanse protocol gives a contained single-host event, 24 hours, from spore contact to resolution. You have used 11. I recommend you spend the remaining 13, letting your crew say what they need to say to him through the glass. The Absolution will handle the rest. It is quick and it is painless, and it is the only mercy that has ever worked." "Commandant," Vesca said, stepping into the pickup. "With respect. The host is conscious. The host has been conscious for 11 hours. The infection is failing." The bridge screen held Orvik's graven face in silence for a moment, and when she answered, her voice had changed, not softened, exactly, but aged. "Doctor," she said. "At Collis Ring, in the second year of the bloom, I watched a host's family keep him hidden for 2 days because he seemed fine. He seemed fine right up until the hour he wasn't, and Collis Ring is a number on a memorial wall now, 11,000 names, and I knew 400 of them personally. The mirror is not a disease. It is patient dirt. It waits behind whatever face it has taken until the count is in its favor. Whatever your scans show you, they are showing you what it wants shown. 13 hours, Doctor. Make them count. The screen went dark, and the caravel hung in the silence every crew learns eventually, the kind with a countdown inside it. Tilo came to the quarantine glass at hour 12, when the rest of the crew had been ordered to their bunks and had gone as far as the corridor outside the med bay, which was as close to obeying as anyone got that night. The young Quill stood with his quills at half bristle, which Veska, watching from her station, had learned to read as the posture of someone assembling courage from parts. Sam watched him assemble it, propped up in his nest of blankets, and waited the way he waited for dough. "You shouldn't have done it," Tilo said finally into the calm. The words came out fast and furious, hours of rehearsal collapsing. "I'm a deckhand. There's 9 of us on the roster. His quills flattened entirely. You make the food. You make this ship a place. Nobody can do what you do, and you traded it for me fee like it was nothing, and if you die, I have to live my whole life knowing the math came out wrong." Sam was quiet for a moment. The fever had hollowed his face, but his eyes were doing what they did across the pass of a busy kitchen, taking everything in, unhurried. "Kid," he said. 30 years ago, a line cook in Veracruz pulled me out from under a flipped fryer station and took the oil down her whole left arm doing it. I told her almost exactly what you just told me. You know what she said? She said, "You don't get to decide what you were worth to me. That's my call." He shifted against the glass, closer to the calm. "The math didn't come out wrong, Tilo. The math came out human. We don't run those numbers the way the rest of the catalog does. Never have. It's not a flaw in the species. It's the load-bearing wall." "What do I do?" Tilo said, smaller, "while we wait?" Sam grinned, 3 days of fire behind it, and warmth all the way through anyway. "You proof tomorrow's bread," he said. "Starters in the cold room, second shelf. If I'm still here in the morning, you'll have learned something. If I'm not, this crew is going to need fresh bread more than any crew has ever needed anything. Either way, the work's not wasted. That's the whole secret, kid. Either way, the work's not wasted." Veska wrote that down too. By then, she had stopped pretending. Her case file was only about the mirror. Dinner happened anyway. That was the part Veska wrote about afterward that the medical journals cut and the history books kept. The crew of the caravel had not eaten a real meal since the pod cracked, and at hour 14 Sam Reyes sat up in quarantine, looked through the glass at the gray faces looking back, and declared that this was, first of all, bad for morale, and second of all, fixable, because the menu for tonight had been braised greens and dumplings since Tuesday, and nobody needed his hands for that. They needed his eyes. So Tilo went to the galley, and Sam directed him through the calm, propped against the quarantine glass, with a fever bright enough to read by. It went badly, and it went wonderfully. Tilo overproofed the dumplings and undersalted the greens and burned the first batch of aromatics into charcoal because his quills kept bristling at the stove flame. The crew gathered in the mess anyway because the alternative was gathering nowhere. Sam talked the deckhand through the second batch in the tone he used for everything, low and warm and impossible to panic, the same voice for a burned pan as for a parasite older than spaceflight. Add the stock now. Scrape the bottom. That's flavor, not failure. Taste it. Always taste it. Veska sat in the corner of the mess with a bowl of slightly wrong dumplings and watched a crew of 6 species eat dinner together on a ship under a death sentence, and recorded in her log, because she was a scientist and honesty was the discipline, that the host's psychological profile remained the single most stable dataset aboard, her own included. That was the night the thing inside Sam Reyes began to talk. The Night Watch heard it first, over the quarantine monitor, at the hour when the ship pretended to sleep. Sam's voice but flattened. The warmth boiled off, coming up out of his sleeping body like a recording played in an empty room. "Open the door," it said. "He is tired. He is so tired of carrying you all. I can carry him. Open the door and we will carry everyone." By the time Vesca reached the med bay, half the crew was already there, pressed back from the glass, and Tilo's quills were flat against his skull, and Captain Brell stood with his hand near the bay's atmosphere console. In a way, Vesca understood completely and hated anyway. The mirror had found the speech centers. Not taken them, the scans were unambiguous. The threads were dying faster than ever, walled off, burned out, eaten. But dying things grow eloquent. It had reached the part of Sam that made words, and it was using his sleeping mouth the way a sieged army uses a captured radio. "Doctor," Brell said quietly, "tell me again about the scans." "The scans say it's losing," Vesca said. "Collis Ring's scans said the same thing." "Collis Ring didn't have scans like mine," Vesca said, with more steel than she knew she carried. And then the voice from the cot changed everything by changing tactics. "Vesca," it said. "Doctor, you have the burn codes. He would forgive you." "He forgives everyone. It's the weakness in this species. It's the door they all leave open. He forgave the woman in Veracruz who burned him with the fryer oil. He forgave his father. He would forgive you before the air finished leaving the bay." The crew went very still. And Sam Reyes, eyes still closed, fever bright, said in his own voice, his real one, rough with sleep and entirely awake, "Hey, Doc, I'm here," Vesca said. "It's scared," Sam said. "Whatever it's saying, that's not strategy. I can feel it in there, kind of. Like a kitchen on fire. It's not talking because it's winning. It's talking because it's 3 days into the worst decision its species ever made, and nobody's coming." He breathed for a while, slow and deliberate. "Don't open the door," he said. "Not for it, and not for me. We finish this the regular way. You sweat it out." At hour 55, the scans changed, and what they showed sent Vesca to the comm to call the absolution herself. The mirror had stopped spreading. All remaining threads had pulled back from the failing fronts, regrouped around a single dense knot of tissue near the sternum, and the knot was growing. Energy readings off it climbed by the hour. Every parallel in the literature said the same thing. Terminal stage mass, pre-burst. When a mere colony lost a host before it could walk the host somewhere useful, it spent its last hours converting everything it had left into spore payload and tore the host open to seed the air. The math was simple and vicious. The knot would reach burst mass in roughly 20 hours. If it burst inside the caravel, the ship was a pod crack with engines. Kill the host now, and the knot died unfinished, inert, harmless. Wait, and hope the human immune system could take a fortified position before the payload matured, and lose the bet, and lose everything. Orvek took the call with her burn projectors already warm. She listened without a single interruption, which was somehow worse than argument, and then she said, "So the door opens after all. Doctor, I have stood where you are standing, closer than you know. I am sending you something. I have never sent it to anyone." The file was a security recording, 60 years old, from a Colony Rings emergency bulkhead. It showed a younger Orvek in a junior officer's plate, standing at a sealed blast door, and on the other side of the door's small window, a Jurassic family. Plated faces, 2 adults. 3 children, the smallest one held up to the glass. "My posting was the bulkhead," Orvek said flatly, over the image. Minute 2 of the Collis Ring bloom, with movement in the corridor behind them. Protocol said sealed meant sealed. The infected walk calm, you understand. You cannot tell. There was no way to tell. She let the recording run 1 more second, the smallest child's hand flat on the glass, and then cut it. "They tested clean," she said. "All 5. The retrieval teams confirmed it in the after-action, 3 years later, when anyone could bear to look. My family was clean, and I held the door, because the count was 11,000 against 5, and the count is always right, Doctor. The count is the only thing that has ever beaten the mirror. So when I tell you, I will give you until burst minus 4 hours before the absolution burns that deck, I am telling you I have already broken protocol further for your cook than I did for my own blood. Spend it well. In the quarantine alcove, they told Sam the arithmetic, because he asked, and lying to him had stopped occurring to anyone by hour 12. 20 hours to burst, he said. 4 hours of margin. So I've got 16 hours to finish a fight I can't see, or the nice commandant spaces this deck with me on it. That's the count, Brell said. Sam was quiet for a moment, hollow-eyed, 3 days of fire behind his face, and then he said, "No, the count's wrong. If it bursts, you lose the ship. If you wait and burn at -4, you're betting 22 lives on a 4-hour margin around a thing nobody's ever measured before." He pushed himself up on the cot, and his voice stayed level, galley level, the voice for burned pans. "Put me in the cargo airlock, right now. It bursts in vacuum or it dies in me. Either way, it never touches Tilo. I've done this math all my life, Doc. It's just portions. 22 servings, 1 me. It divides clean." "No," said Veska, and Tilo, and Brell, and the calm, in 4 species worth of accents at once. The vote that wasn't a vote took 4 minutes. Brell didn't hold votes on his ship, but he had a way of standing in the mess with his arms folded that collected opinions, whether people offered them or not, and the opinions were unanimous. The cook did not go out the airlock. The cook stayed, and the crew stayed with the cook, and if the count went bad at burst -4, then the Caravel's people would be standing in their own galley when the absolution did what the absolution did, together, fed, and on their own deck. "You're all idiots," Sam said through the glass, in the voice other people used for thank you. "It's your cooking," Brell said. "Nobody wants to go back to nutrient paste. Don't flatter yourself." Alone at her station afterward, Veska played Orvik's recording one more time. The sealed door. The small hand flat on the glass. The plated young officer holding her post while the count did its work. She had thought, the first time, that the commandant had sent it as a weapon, proof that sentiment kills, that the door must always hold. She watched it differently now, the 3rd time, the 10th. Orvik had not sent her a lesson. Orvik had sent her the wound, the thing 60 years of fire had been built on top of, the question that had never once stopped being asked behind those graven plates. What if the count is wrong? What if it was wrong that day, the one day it mattered? 60 years of holding doors, Veska thought, and the first crew in history that refused to open one for the right reasons had just invited their infected cook to dinner. Somewhere between those 2 facts was the paper she would actually need to write someday. And it would not be about the mirror at all. She went back to the scans because hour 60 was coming, and the knot was still growing, and hope was not a clinical instrument. It was Veska who found it at hour 61 because she was the only person in the galaxy who had ever pointed a full diagnostic array at a dying mirror and kept it running for 3 days. She was rechecking the knot's energy signature against burst models when the pattern snagged her eye. The output wasn't smooth. It pulsed. Structured, repeating, modulated pulses, riding the same exotic band the mirror used to coordinate between hosts, the spore band, the channel that had let 100 worlds fall in a year because every colony learned what every other colony knew. She had assumed the knot was a bomb because the literature said dying mirror build bombs. She ran the pulse train through the comparative library twice, then a 3rd time, bloodlight flickering hard, and then she sat very still in the empty medbay and said, out loud, to nobody, "It's not a payload. It's a transmitter." The scream was not meant for anyone aboard. She called both ships onto one channel, and put the waveform on every screen. And for once in 3 days, nobody interrupted her, because her bloodlight was burning bright enough to read by, and even the Drassic knew what that meant on an Ilvathi. The Mir network shares everything, she said. That's its whole advantage. Every nest knows what every nest learned. That's how it beat us. That's how it always wins. Nothing it touches ever gets to teach anyone else. She pulled up the knot, the dense pulsing pearl of it, on the main feed. This one has spent 3 days being beaten. First contact in its species history with an immune system that hunts. And it has converted everything it has left, not into spores, Commandant, into signal, into a flare on the spore band, aimed at everything out there that can hear. It is not building a bomb, it is filing a report. It took every host it ever touched in 3 minutes. It has been screaming inside this human for 3 days, and every nest in range is going to hear exactly what it's screaming about. Silence on 2 bridges. So the question, Veska said, isn't whether we can afford to let it finish. It's whether the galaxy can afford for us to shut it up. Orvek's graven face filled half the feed, unreadable, and her voice when it came was the flat tone of a quarantine officer doing arithmetic she did not yet believe. You are asking me to hold my burn so that the Mir can broadcast. I'm asking you to let it tell the truth, Veska said. 60 years of fire, Commandant, and it never learned to fear us because we never left it a witness. It finally found something it cannot take, and it is dying, and with its last act it is warning its entire species away from human blood. She looked straight into the pickup. You have spent your whole life trying to send the Mir a message. The message is currently composing itself inside my patient. Let it finish the broadcast. The countdown stood at burst -9. Orvek stared into the feed for 4 long seconds. Hold the burn, she said. Absolution. Stand to. Doctor, if that mass deviates 1 measure from your model, I will not wait for -4. It won't, Sam Reyes said from the quarantine cot, fever-cracked, eyes shut, with the first ghost of a grin in 2 days. Fire's mostly embers in here now, and I just work here. 3 minutes. Huh. Somebody should tell it the rules changed. The signal peaked at hour 71, a pulse train so dense the caravel's hull sang with it faintly, like a struck pot. Long-range arrays would later confirm reception at 14 known Meyer blooms and an unknown number of dormant seedbeds. The knot's output fell off through the night watch like a tide going out. At hour 79, Sam Reyes's fever broke, drenching 3 blankets, and the scans showed the thing his body had done while the galaxy watched, walls of calcified scar tissue closing over the silent knot, sealing it whole, the way an oyster handles an insult it cannot expel. The Mir did not get a grave. It got a pearl. He slept 11 hours, woke up clear-eyed, and asked 2 questions, in order. Whether everyone was okay, and what the bread starter had done while he was out. It was 3 more days before anyone let him in a kitchen, and that was where the bill came due, because the war had not been free. The fever had burned hot enough, long enough, that some of the small machinery of Sam Reyes had been spent as ammunition. He stood in the caravel's galley with a spoonful of the dumpling broth he had made 400 times, tasted it, and went very still. Doc, he said, I can't taste it. Salt, a little. Heat. That's all there is. The scans confirmed what the scans had no kind way to say. The cytokine fire had taken the fine wiring of smell and most of taste with it, collateral of his own artillery, permanent. A cook, said the file, in the dry language of files, with sensory deficit, total olfactory, severe gustatory. He stood in the galley a long time, alone, holding the spoon. Then he called Tilo in, and Brel, and Veska, and the rest, all 6 species of them, and lined up tasting spoons on the counter like surgical tools, and said, laying his knuckles flat on the counter the way he always did when a shift was about to get loud, all right, listen up. I've got every recipe on this boat in my hands and my head, but my tongue's been honorably discharged. From now on, you taste. I read your faces, I fix accordingly. Tilo, you're salt. You flinch honest. Doc, you're acid. Captain, you're my heat. You've got no shame about complaining. He picked up the first spoon and held it out. Dinner's at 6. Same as always. Veska's paper took a year to clear review, mostly because the Comparative Immunology Board kept sending it back with variations of the comment surely not. Its title entered the languages of 40 species more or less intact. On the reclassification of the human immune response, from biological process to standing army. The Combine rewrote Clan's protocol the same season. Single-host Mire events on mixed crews now carry a new decision branch, contingent on the host being human, and the patrol ships that fly it, crewed heavy with human volunteers, picked up their name from a thing Orvek said at the tribunal and never managed to live down. The Fever Watch. Within a decade, 4 more mere blooms met human hosts. 4 more screams went out on the spore band. The blooms nearest the broadcasts have begun doing something no mere colony has done in recorded history. They withdraw. Spore counts falling, seedbeds going dormant, the frost retreating from the one pane of glass that burned it back. Orvik came aboard the caravel before the ships parted ways. She came without her plate gleaming, an old Squawkranton officer in a plain uniform, and she stood in the galley, of all places, where Sam was teaching Tilo to read a sauce by sound. I sealed my own family behind blast doors to buy 3 minutes, she said, without preamble, because the Drassic do not warm up to things. They were clean, and I held the door anyway, because the Count said to, and the Count was all we had. She looked at the pearl on the scan flexi Veska had given her, the war grave sealed in scar tissue under a cook's sternum. Your species carries the war the rest of us ran from, she said. Carries it everywhere, in your blood, your whole lives, and wins it lying down, apologizing for the inconvenience. I have hated the mirror for 60 years, and it never once feared me. 3 days with you, and it is teaching its grandchildren your name. You want some soup, Sam said. It's good, I'm told. She stayed for dinner. It went in her report. Veska closed her case file with a line the journals cut and the history books kept. And since the journals cut it, the historians had to take it from her log verbatim. Every species in the catalog evolved to flee the smallest enemies, she wrote. Humans made that war permanent and won it so long ago they forgot they were veterans. We keep asking what the death world made of them. The better question is what it made of everything that lives inside them, and whether the rest of us were ever really meeting humans at all, or just the honor guard. The caravel flies its old routes with one addition to the manifest, listed under permanent cargo, 1 pearl, location sternum, owner disinclined to part with it. Sam Reyes still runs the galley by other people's faces, and swears the food has never been better, and is, by 6 species testimony, correct. And in a system no chart bothers naming, a mere seed world that has lain silent for 1,000 years, has started, very faintly, to sing on the spore band again. The pattern is new. The arrays can't classify it. It does not sound like spreading. It sounds, the duty analyst wrote, before deleting the line, before retyping it, like asking permission. The Fever Watch has dispatched a ship. There's a cook aboard.